There is a truth so simple and yet so profound that it changes the way we view our lives. God walks with you. Not above you, not ahead of you in unreachable majesty, but with you. Through the quiet mornings and the stormy nights. Many believe that God's presence is only revealed in moments of divine intervention, in grand miracles, in times of overwhelming joy. But what if I told you that God is just as present in the silence, in the waiting, in the unanswered questions? Faith is not about feeling God near. It is about knowing He is there, even when you do not feel it. From the moment we take our first breath to the final sigh of our existence, we are never truly alone. The presence of God is not confined to places of worship, nor is it reserved for moments of triumph or despair. He is not a distant ruler watching from the heavens, detached from the struggles and joys of His creation. Instead, He walks alongside us, a constant and unwavering companion on the journey of life. Many perceive God's presence as something to be sought after, as though He were far away, waiting for us to prove ourselves worthy before He draws near. But the truth is quite the opposite. God is not found, He is. Whether we acknowledge Him or not, He remains with us, weaving His presence into the fabric of our daily lives. He is in the laughter of a child, in the warmth of the sun on our faces, in the quiet moments when the world seems still. He is not merely a figure to be called upon in times of need, but a companion in every moment, whether we recognize Him or not. It is easy to believe in God's presence when life is smooth, when prayers are answered swiftly, and when circumstances align in our favor. In such moments we feel the nearness of the divine, as though heaven itself is smiling upon us. But what of the times when silence stretches on, when prayers seem to go unanswered, and when darkness obscures the path ahead? Many begin to question whether God has withdrawn, whether He has stepped away, leaving them to wander alone. Yet His presence is not dictated by our perception. Just as the sun remains even when hidden by clouds, so too does God remain with us, even when we do not feel Him near. Some might ask, if God walks with me, why do I not always sense His presence? This question arises from the misconception that God's nearness must always be accompanied by tangible proof, an emotion, a sign, an audible voice. But faith does not rest on evidence alone. It rests on trust. A traveler in the dark does not cease to walk simply because he cannot see the path clearly. He moves forward, knowing that the road continues beneath his feet. So it is with the journey of faith. We walk, not because we see, but because we trust that He who walks with us will never lead us astray. God's presence is not a mere idea or a theological concept. It is a reality. Whether we stand on the mountaintop or find ourselves in the valley, whether we rejoice or weep, whether we feel Him near or struggle in doubt, He remains. To walk with God is to live with the assurance that we are never abandoned, never forsaken, never truly alone. It is this truth that brings strength in weakness, hope in despair, and peace in the midst of life's storms. The presence of God is not a passing comfort. It is the very foundation upon which we stand. There is a common misunderstanding that faith is meant to be constantly accompanied by feelings of divine closeness, warmth, and reassurance. Many believe that if they do not feel God near, He must not be there at all. But faith is not built upon emotions. It is built upon truth. Feelings fluctuate, but truth remains. God's presence is not determined by the state of our hearts or minds. It is a reality that exists beyond our perception. Emotions, though valuable, are unreliable guides. They change with circumstances, influenced by the events of the day, our health, our relationships, and even the weather. One moment a person may feel spiritually uplifted, filled with confidence in God's nearness. The next, doubt may creep in, and they may wonder if He has withdrawn. If faith were dependent on emotions, it would be as unstable as the wind, constantly shifting with each passing storm. But true faith is not a matter of feeling. It is a conviction that remains firm, regardless of what the heart may say. A child walking with their father. The child may not always feel the grip of their father's hand, but that does not mean the father has let go. Even when the child is unaware, the father is still near, watching, guiding, and protecting. Likewise, God does not need to prove His presence through constant emotional reassurance. His nearness is not validated by how strongly we sense it. It simply is. There are times when God seems silent, when prayers feel as though they go unheard, and when spiritual dryness takes hold. It is in these moments that faith is truly tested. If one's trust in God is based solely on how they feel, then such seasons of silence will lead to despair. But if faith is anchored in the certainty of God's character and His promises, then silence becomes an opportunity to trust rather than a reason to doubt. Just as the night sky remains filled with stars even when hidden by clouds, so too does God remain present even when He feels distant. It is tempting to chase after emotions, to seek experiences that reaffirm God's presence through heightened feelings. But faith that depends on constant emotional confirmation is fragile. A faith that endures is one that rests not on how near God feels, but on the unchanging truth that He is near. This is why Scripture repeatedly calls believers to walk by faith, not by sight, or in this case, by feeling. True faith is demonstrated when one continues to trust even when emotions provide no comfort. It is shown in prayers that persist despite seeming silence, in obedience that remains steadfast even in uncertainty, and in the quiet confidence that God's presence does not waver based on human perception. Faith overcomes feelings, not by denying them, but by refusing to be ruled by them. It is a choice to trust in what is true rather than what is felt, knowing that God's presence is unwavering, even when our hearts are not. Suffering is one of the greatest challenges to faith, leading many to question God's presence and purpose. If God walks with us, why do we face pain, loss, and hardship? Wouldn't His nearness shield us from such trials? This assumption, though understandable, is based on a misunderstanding of God's role in our lives. His presence does not mean the absence of suffering. Rather, it means that suffering is never faced alone, never without purpose, and never beyond redemption. Pain is an unavoidable part of life. No one escapes it, regardless of their faith, character, or actions. Yet, suffering is often viewed as a sign of divine abandonment rather than an opportunity for transformation. It is easy to trust God when life is comfortable, when prayers are answered quickly, and when the path ahead is clear. But when hardships arise, faith is tested, revealing whether it is built on temporary blessings or on the unshakable foundation of God's character. Throughout history, the greatest figures of faith endured suffering, not as punishment, but as a means of refinement. Gold is purified in fire, iron is strengthened through pressure, and the soul is shaped in trials. Difficulties are not evidence that God has withdrawn. They are moments when He works most deeply within us. They force us to rely on Him, to seek Him beyond the surface of fleeting emotions, and to find strength that is not our own. How suffering changes a person. It strips away illusions, revealing what truly matters. It humbles the proud, strengthens the weak, and deepens compassion. Those who have walked through pain with faith emerge with a perspective that is richer and wisdom that is hard-earned. They come to understand that God's greatest work is often done in the depths of difficulty rather than in the heights of ease. Even knowing this, suffering remains difficult to bear. The human heart longs for relief, for answers, for assurance that pain is not meaningless. And indeed it is not. Every hardship, every tear, every struggle is seen and known by God. He does not waste suffering. He weaves it into a greater purpose, one that is often beyond our immediate understanding. This is why trust is essential. When walking through hardship, the choice must be made to believe that suffering is pointless, or to believe that God is using it for a greater purpose. The latter choice does not eliminate pain, but it transforms it. It allows suffering to become a tool rather than a burden, a means of growth rather than a cause for despair. God does not promise a life free from trials, but He does promise that we will never walk through them alone. The presence of suffering does not negate the presence of God. Rather, it is in suffering that His presence can be most profoundly known. Those who trust Him through the storms of life will find, in time, that what once seemed unbearable was the very thing that led them to deeper strength, wisdom, and faith. One of the greatest gifts given to humanity is free will, the ability to choose, to think, and to act according to our own decisions. Yet this gift often leads to a paradox. If God walks with us, why does He not simply direct our every step, preventing us from making mistakes or facing difficulties? Would it not be easier if He controlled our choices, so that we would never stray from the right path? The answer lies in the nature of true love and relationship. God does not walk for us, He walks with us, guiding rather than forcing, leading rather than controlling. A relationship without choice is no relationship at all. If God were to override our free will, we would become mere puppets, incapable of genuine love, trust, or faith. True obedience, true devotion, and true transformation come not from coercion, but from a willing heart. God desires that we walk with Him because we choose to, not because we have no other option. This is why He allows us to make decisions, even when they lead to hardship, because it is through these choices that we learn, grow, at times people may wish that God's guidance were more obvious, that He would speak audibly at every crossroad or physically intervene when they are about to take a wrong step. But this is not how God works. His presence does not eliminate the need for discernment, wisdom, and trust. Instead, He provides direction through His word, through the quiet stirrings of the soul, through the circumstances of life, and through the counsel of those who walk in faith. He does not force the journey upon us, but invites us to follow Him willingly. This also means that with free will comes responsibility. Every choice carries weight, and every path we take shapes who we become. God's presence does not remove the consequences of our actions. Rather, it gives us the strength and wisdom to navigate them. When we walk in alignment with His truth, we experience the peace and purpose that come from following His ways. But when we choose to walk apart from Him, we find ourselves lost, burdened, and uncertain. Even then, God does not abandon us. He remains near, waiting for us to turn back, to seek him once more, and to continue the journey in step with him. This is the beauty of free will in the presence of God. We are never forced, yet we are never alone. We are given the freedom to choose, yet we are never without guidance. God's presence is not a barrier that prevents us from making mistakes, but a light that shows us the way when we are willing to see it. To walk with God is to embrace the responsibility of choice, while trusting that He walks beside us, ready to guide, correct, and strengthen us as we move forward. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and our relationship with God is no different. To walk with Him is to trust Him, even when the path ahead is unclear. Yet trust does not come naturally to the human heart. It is far easier to rely on what we can see, feel, and understand than to place our confidence in something beyond our immediate perception. This is why faith requires surrender, a willingness to believe that God is leading us, even when we do not fully comprehend His ways. Life is filled with uncertainty. No one can predict what tomorrow holds, and this unpredictability often leads to fear. The human mind craves control, seeking to map out every detail of life in a way that guarantees safety, success, and stability. But the reality is that control is an illusion. No matter how much we plan, life remains unpredictable. Circumstances shift, plans unravel, and what once seemed certain can change in an instant. If our trust is placed solely in our own ability to manage life, we will inevitably be left anxious and weary. God calls us to a different way of living, not one rooted in fear, but in faith. Trusting God does not mean ignoring wisdom or failing to make responsible choices. Rather, it means acknowledging that, ultimately, He is the one who holds all things together. It means recognizing that His understanding far surpasses our own, and His ways, though sometimes mysterious, are always good. Trust is not built in moments of ease, but in times of difficulty, when we must choose to believe that God is working even when we cannot see the outcome. Consider the image of a traveler walking through a dense fog. He cannot see more than a few steps ahead, and beyond that, all is unknown. If he allows fear to take hold, he may become paralyzed, unwilling to move forward. But if he trusts the guide who walks beside him, he can take each step with confidence, knowing that he is being led in the right direction. So it is with God. We may not always see the full picture, but we are not meant to. We are called to trust the One who does. This kind of trust requires humility, a recognition that we do not have all the answers. It also requires patience, for God's timing is often different from our own. When prayers seem unanswered or doors remain closed, it is tempting to believe that God is absent or uncaring. Yet, His silence is not a sign of neglect, but an invitation to deeper trust. He sees what we cannot, and His delays are often His way of preparing us for what lies ahead. Walking with God means walking in trust, even when the road is uncertain. It means believing that He is guiding us, even when we cannot see the way. And it means surrendering control, not in weakness, but in faith, knowing that the One who walks with us is always faithful, always good, and always leading us toward His perfect plan. Many people expect to find God only in extraordinary moments, miracles, revelations, or grand spiritual experiences. They believe that His presence is most evident in dramatic encounters or life-changing events. While God certainly reveals Himself in powerful ways at times, He is not limited to these rare occurrences. More often than not, he is found in the ordinary, in the unnoticed, and in the seemingly mundane aspects of daily life. The problem is not that God is absent, but that we fail to recognize him in the simplicity of our everyday existence. Consider the way the world operates. The sun rises and sets, seasons change, and the human body functions with intricate precision, all without our conscious effort. Behind these ordinary rhythms lies the hand of God, sustaining creation and ensuring that life continues. Yet, because these things happen consistently, we take them for granted. We look for God in the extraordinary, while overlooking his presence in the very breath we take, in the kindness of a stranger, or in the quiet strength that carries us through difficult days. God's presence is woven into the fabric of daily life, but it requires attentiveness to see it. A gentle sunrise, the laughter of a child, the comfort of a friend. These are not just random moments, but reflections of a God who is near. He does not always reveal himself with thunder and fire. Sometimes he comes in a whisper, in the stillness of the heart, or in the simple joys that we often overlook. One of the reasons people struggle to sense God in the ordinary is that they expect him to fit into human expectations. They assume that if he is truly present, he will make himself known in unmistakable ways. But throughout history, God has chosen to work through the small and the simple. He spoke to Elijah not in the wind, earthquake, or fire, but in a gentle whisper. He chose a humble stable for the birth of his son, rather than a royal palace. His ways are often quiet yet deeply profound. This realization transforms the way we live. Instead of constantly seeking signs and wonders, we learn to walk in daily awareness of God's presence. We begin to see him in the ordinary tasks of life, in the work we do, in the relationships we nurture, in the struggles we endure. Nothing is too small or insignificant to be touched by his presence. Even the most routine moments become sacred when we recognize that God is with us in them. Walking with God does not always mean witnessing miracles. It means living with the understanding that he is present in every aspect of life. It means finding him in the ordinary, in the quiet, in the unnoticed details of daily existence. When we open our eyes to this reality, we begin to see that God is not distant, but ever near, speaking through the simple and the small, reminding us that we are never alone. Walking with God is not a passive experience. It requires action, commitment, and obedience. Many desire the comfort of his presence without the responsibility that comes with it. They long for his guidance, but hesitate to follow when his direction challenges their own desires. However, true companionship with God means walking in his ways, aligning our lives with his truth, and submitting to his will, even when it is difficult. To walk with God is to walk in obedience. Obedience is often misunderstood as mere rule-following, as if God's commands are burdensome restrictions designed to limit freedom. But in reality, his commands are meant to lead us into fullness of life. A loving parent sets boundaries for a child, not to control them, but to protect them from harm. Similarly, God's instructions are given for our good, to guide us away from paths that lead to destruction and toward those that bring life, peace, and purpose. When we resist his ways, we are not exercising freedom. We are choosing a path that leads to confusion, regret, and spiritual stagnation. Walking in obedience does not mean we will never struggle or make mistakes. No one follows God perfectly, and he does not expect flawless performance. Rather, obedience is about the posture of the heart, a willingness to listen, to trust, and to align our actions with His truth. When we stumble, He does not abandon us. He calls us to stand, to learn, and to continue walking with Him. The journey of obedience is not about achieving perfection, but about consistently choosing His ways over our own, even when it is difficult. Obedience often requires trust, especially when God's ways seem unclear or challenging. There will be times when His direction contradicts our personal desires, when following Him means letting go of something we hold dear, or when His timing does not align with our expectations. In those moments, we face a choice: to trust that His wisdom is greater than ours, or to insist on our own understanding. Many struggle at this crossroad, fearing that obedience will cost too much. But in reality, the greatest cost comes from walking apart from God. When we choose disobedience, we step away from His peace, His guidance, and the fullness of life He offers. Obedience is not merely about avoiding wrong. It is about actively pursuing what is right. It means loving when it is inconvenient, forgiving when it is undeserved, serving when it is unnoticed, and standing for truth when it is unpopular. These choices are not always easy, but they are the mark of a life that truly walks with God. To walk with God is to follow where He leads, even when the path is difficult. It is to trust that His commands are not burdens but blessings. It is to surrender not out of fear but out of love. Those who choose this path will find that obedience is not a limitation, but the very key to experiencing the deep, abiding presence of God in every step of life.